I sure am bored with Springer never around. He is always off with Hot Rod.
Hey, RC. You wanna play a game?
Yeah, Windblade. That sounds like fun. What kind of game?
Let's play the movie game. We act out scenes from a famous movie.
That sounds really fun. What movie?
Have you ever seen Bound? With Gina Gershon and Jennifer Tilly?
And howdy party people and space cadets, and welcome to the Galactic Happy Hour. I'm your host, Spider Island Slim, and on this week's episode we will be talking about my favorite Transformers toys, figures. I never know what to call them because they're not really figures per se, but I just don't like really generalizing them with toys because that could be anything across the spectrum of product. But I'm just going to say for this one, my favorite Transformers toys, because it does run the gamut a little bit in this. And number 5 on the list is Ravage from 1984. And Ravage was a Decepticon cassette tape that turned into a robot jaguar. Not a dog. Drives me crazy when people call him a robot dog. He's a jaguar. And like with GoBots, interestingly, the Transformers line was actually a Western release of a Japanese toy line. GoBots was, of course, a Western release of the Japanese Machine Robo line. But the first Transformers were also re-releases of existing Japanese lines. Several, in fact. Well, 2. Ravage himself came from the Microchange line, which was a spin-off of the new Microman line from the early 80s. He's known there as Micro Cassette Robo Jaguar. Here he was sold in a 2-pack with Rumble and came with these 2 missile things that plugged into the spool holes in his hip. It's a simple figure, but a figure simple toy, one I always loved, still love, right there on the shelf right there. Don't know if you can see that, but yeah, Ravage. He was great stuff, and I liked him in the cartoon, but in comics and stuff, he could talk and was much more sentient. Really, I always go back to the IDW series where he was a much more in-depth, advanced character. Very cool. And then, of course, there was his great appearance, which I won't spoil too much, on the Beast Wars series, which is amazing stuff in and of itself. Yeah, Ravage. And something I forgot to mention at the top of the show, which I meant to, it's right here in my notes, totally forgot, even still looking right at it, was that these are kind of the preface I often have on these episodes. These are just my favorite toys from growing up, mixed with how much I still have an affection for them now. It really has nothing to do with the characters. Though there is some overlap, this is definitely not my favorite Transformers characters list, just favorite toys. Some of these on here I don't know anything about, don't have any backstory. We're just talking about the toys. And number 4 on the list is Tentakill from 1988. And Tentakill was a Decepticon robotic squid who was a member of the Seacons. And he was this great looking blue and purplish combiner, they all were, that formed into Piranacon. And he came with slime lasers, tripod rifle, connector, and weapon stand base. Just an amazing design and the perfect example, like I was saying, of just loving a toy. As far as I know, he never appeared in the cartoon. Or I don't think he did not ever appear in the cartoon. Pretty sure about that. Right? Yeah, never appeared in the American cartoon. But he did appear as a mindless drone in the Japanese exclusive series Super God Master Force. Man, I love those Japanese names. And those of you who may not know, yeah, Transformers, it was canceled here with that 5-part or 4-part ending miniseries. But in Japan, they just get that. We don't have time for that miniseries. And they just kept going. And they just had all these series that continued G1 that went on for a long, long time. And you could see the characters like Optimus Prime, and they had full story arcs and all kinds of stuff that went on just in Japan, like in Super God Master Force. Amazing name. Now, in Japan, interestingly, they changed some of the Seacons' names. One of them was called Kraken. But get this, Kraken wasn't the squid. He was the manta ray looking guy. You would think that they would have called the squid Kraken. But either way, where was I? Oh yeah, Tentakill. Great looking design, and that might have even been what set me on my path to liking Lovecraft and Squiddy type things so much. But just a cool, great looking design, and I just really took to those Seacons in general, because even with their kind of light blue and purplish color scheme, they were so fearsome and cool looking. And, little fact, one of the few combiners in which I had the entire combiner. And I didn't get them in a gift pack either. I just managed to collect them all and combine them. And speaking of combiners, I don't know if a lot of you had this problem as a kid, but I didn't get a ton of the Transformers often, especially the bigger, more expensive ones. So I would really get into a combiner, start collecting the pieces, but it would take so long to collect it all. I would often kind of, with kid brain, get bored and kind of move on to another character before I could ever actually finish collecting all the pieces to make the combiner. But I did have a few. Like I said, Piranacon, which I actually did, the one I collected in full. Then there was those blue, I guess, rescue bots or something. There was the fire truck and the ambulance, and they were kind of a baby blue. Pretty sure I had all of them, and I know I had all of Devastator, but that was from a gift pack I got at Christmas, and that was from the Generation 2 line. And number 3 on the list is Soundwave from 1984. Of course I have to have Soundwave on the list. I mean, what kind of Transformers list of any kind would not have Soundwave on it? The Decepticon tape recorder, and one of the most iconic characters in the series, and an example of one of my favorites making it to the list. And like Ravage, who was conveniently on this list as well, Ravage could fit into Soundwave's chest. Now, Soundwave started life in the Microchange line as well as Cassette Man. Now, the American release, Western release, came with Buzzsaw, a rocket launcher, 3 rockets, a concussion blaster that fit on his shoulder that was super cool looking. Thought there was going to be And there, didn't you? I did too. Misread my notes. There's no And. Yeah, he was a great character, a great toy, still a favorite of mine. I actually, not terribly long ago, got the non-transforming plastic kind of cheaper line one from Walmart, which I really dig, because honestly, as much as I like Transformers, to me, transforming, and even transforming as a kid, was really a secondary thing. I would kind of find the mode of theirs I liked best and basically just kept them in that at all times. Because too, when you were playing with your friends and you had your Transformers, wow, did having to stop and transform them, especially the more complex ones, really just break the flow of the play. Anyway, in Japan, the toy actually worked. He was actually a working tape recorder. They took that out in the American or Western release. I keep saying American. The Western release, just, I guess, to save cost or whatever. But they did eventually release an actual tape recorder working Soundwave. But it was a big one. I had that, though, and foolishly sold it to a collector, a friend of mine. Silly me. But I was running out of space, and I was just basically collecting anime toys at the time for some reason, and I just, silly regrets. Toy regrets. Most toy collectors have them. And on regrets, I think it's time for a commercial break.
Kimi no 机の上はミラクルワールド。ミクロチェンジシリーズウォッチロボ登場。
I'm spending Wednesday night at the in-laws, but I'm not missing the Wednesday night movie.
I'm working the late shift, but I'm not missing the late show.
Thanks to Sony's revolutionary Betamax deck, which hooks up to any TV set, now you can automatically videotape your favorite show even when you're not home and watch it anytime you want.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm going home to watch the late show.
And number 2 on the list is Grimlock from 1985. The robot Tyrannosaurus, and one of the best characters. Definitely another example of a character I really like on the list, and a fan favorite, and for good reason. And like Soundwave and Ravage, Grimlock was an import from another toy line, a Japanese toy line. Only his came from the Takara Diaclone line, more specifically the Dinosaur Robo series. A large bulk of the first few years of the Transformers line came from that Diaclone line, including the Seekers, Prime, and the Constructicons. And most of them were pretty straightforward transitions when they released them over here. But with Grimlock, for some reason the Japanese had a blue crotch, and that's too easy. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, he had a blue crotch and a different color sword, and of course a minifigure that rode in the cockpit on his back. And I always thought that was so interesting as a kid. Why did Grimlock have this little cockpit on his back? Had no idea that in the Japanese version, he was a piloted robot, and there was a little man that sat in there. But Grimlock came with a sword, laser rifle, rocket launcher, and 3 rockets. Yeah, rockets. Yeah, as a kid, I loved giant robots, loved giant monsters, so it was kind of a no-brainer. Kind of like Grimlock was in the cartoon, but only in the cartoon. Because interestingly, in the comics, he was much more intelligent. And then in later adaptation, the 2, he was intelligent as well. And I know in the Marvel comic, he actually ended up leading the team toward the end of the book there. So yeah, definitely a very different no me Grimlock do this kind of character. Yeah, great character, great toy, and I just had a lot of fun playing with him as Grimlock, and then later on, not as Grimlock, just as a robot dinosaur. It was kind of a good size and just kind of fit into play well. I mean, you could have used him for G.I. Joe as something that Cobra created to take out Joe, all kinds of stuff. Or your post-apocalyptic heavy metal style fantasy play. And number 1 on the list, and this is probably going to come as a surprise to most, and that is Skullgrin from 1988. And Skullgrin was a Decepticon pretender. And pretenders were basically these humanoid shells with a robot inside, very late in the line. And the robot inside Skullgrin transformed into a Cybertronian tank kind of thing. But that wasn't what interested me at all. It was his fantastic looking, super demonic, skull-headed demon-y shell. And he came with a belt, 2 blasters, and a sword. And the blasters could be used for the shell or the robot, and even attached to the robot. Now, I know some folks don't look as kindly, not as nostalgic or fond of the later releases. But see me, I went crazy for the later stuff. It was actually kind of a rebirth for me. I kind of lost interest in Transformers. At that point, I would think, what was I really into at that time? Probably getting close to Ninja Turtles, but not quite yet. But either way, I just wasn't really that into Transformers anymore. But then the Pretenders came out. And, oh man, I could have just done a whole list just on that line. It had so many cool ones. Like Iguanus, the guy with the squiddy guy, another squiddy guy, with kind of the old-fashioned diving helmet on his head. Yeah, just great figures. And I even kind of started reading the comic at that point because I saw a cover that had the Pretenders on it. And it just breathed, like I said, a whole new life in the Transformers for me. Just really got me heavily back into the line. And Skullgrin is another character that did not appear on the cartoon. So other than their small appearance in the comics, I really knew nothing about this character. I just know I had a ton of fun with that robot, or with the monster shell, playing him as different kind of different kind of monstery things. And the figures inside, later on, I remember when I kind of started really getting into anime and discovered stuff like the Bubblegum Crisis and things like that, I would play with the little robot inside, pretending it was like kind of an Ultraman type character or a person in a suit or something. And I remember I had the Biker Mice from Mars motorcycle, and I would put the Skullgrin robot, have him ride on that motorcycle, and just kind of made up my own little adventures, this kind of anime-esque thing. Yeah, tons of fun. Skullgrin, cool stuff. Transformers, Pretenders, all that great stuff. And on that, that's all the time we have for this week. Please like, comment, subscribe, and may your pants always be filled with marshmallows that split open and have a little marshmallow inside.